Welcome back to another episode of Transcriber from Reddit. Today's topic is cross-posted to Games Denominations Play due to the content that I will be reading. I will be covering the Gottesdienst.org blog. It is the Journal of Lutheran Liturgy. It's an LCMS blog, and they are very devoted to the idea and writing about the idea of what makes Lutherans and what makes good Lutherans good Lutherans. This particular post comes from Bernell Eckhart from February 3rd, 2024. Can you believe it's been a year already? The post is titled, quote, "They worship the liturgy," end quote. Below that, we see an image of a friar behind another friar. And the friar who's in front appears to be at a somewhat medieval table set out for the Lord's Supper. I begin reading. At Gottesdienst, we are familiar with the kind of complaints our adversaries like to level, that we're legalists or modern-day Pharisees, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. I think of these complaints as indicators of very poor worship practices on the part of those who make them. The easy way for them to deal with our concerns is to resort to ad hominem attacks. Consider and dismiss the source, and you can dismiss the point, no matter how valid it might be, without giving it much thought. Recently, I heard a new variety of this complaint which amused me. Quote, "They worship the liturgy," end quote. Translated, this means that we don't worship God, and therefore one should not be overly concerned about the liturgical concerns of us Gottesdiensters, because there is a danger of unbelief and idolatry there. Side note, that, I think, should be used as an example of strawmanning your opponent's argument. The majority of people who say, quote, "they worship the liturgy," do not actually think that you are not worshiping God. They think that you think so highly of the liturgy that you worship it on the same level that you worship Christ, and sometimes to a greater extent. But no, in this case, the writer has strawmanned his opponents to make it seem as though they think he does not believe in God at all. Continuing on, it's not only a very shallow way to dismiss our concerns, it's quite possibly a very tragic, really a kind of projecting. Side note, that really needed a comma somewhere. Maybe two. Continuing on. How is attention to worship in a liturgical way a false kind of worship? If it is, does that mean that one must not worship in a liturgical way to be worshiping rightly? Note that the word "not" is italicized. Must we be casual? Wear hush puppies? Eschew vestments and wear polo shirts? How far does this go? How is it idolatrous to bend the knee before Jesus? And if it is, does that mean one must not bend the knee in adoration to be adoring him properly? Note that the word "not" is italicized. And if that's true, does that mean that we must remove our communion rails and begin communing without kneeling at all? Note that the word "that's" is italicized. Or how is elevating the host and cup a sign of unbelief or false worship? Here's where it gets really dicey, because some would say it certainly is, and they even point to the Formula of Concord, which says that among the things we condemn is this, quote, "when it is taught that the elements or the visible species or forms of the consecrated bread and wine must be adored," end quote. But if one continues with the words immediately following, there's this, quote, However, no one, unless he be an Arian heretic, can and will deny that Christ himself, true God and man, who is truly and essentially present in the supper, should be adored in spirit and in truth, in the true use of the same, as also in all other places, especially where his congregation is assembled." End quote. Parentheses. FC SD 7 126. End parentheses. Thus, when we elevate the host and cup, we are not adoring mere bread and wine, but Christ himself, who is, quote, truly and essentially present, end quote, there. In fact, the very same thing can be said about kneeling at the communion rail. Note that the words "very same thing" are italicized. So the more important question is this: what does this say about someone who refuses to adore Christ in the supper? Say, someone who refuses to kneel at the communion rail. After all, we are all kneeling in adoration at the communion rail, are we not? Note that the words "in adoration" are italicized. Question: if you kneel at the communion rail, are you worshiping the liturgy? And if not, then how come we who adore Christ liturgically in the sacrament are any different? What's the difference between elevating host and cup in adoration and kneeling at the rail in adoration? Isn't it the same thing? Or perhaps, dear critic, you hadn't thought of that. In which case, I'd suggest it's time you did. And either you join us who are trying to provide helpful rubrics and liturgical instruction on how best to worship the incarnate one who is present in the liturgy and in the supper, or, well, I guess you'd better stop kneeling at the rail. Because, just what do you believe anyway? Surely you're no Arian heretic, right? I suggest you'd better figure this all out before you go making ad hominem accusations. Whom do you worship, and how do you worship him? If you need help with that, we're only too glad to oblige. And here, yes, they linked their print subscription, their bulk subscription, the self-promotion is to be applauded. You definitely want people to read more of your stuff. However, considering the absolute arrogance of the post, I'm surprised that actually prompted people to even consider clicking on this link to order some of their written stuff. Not just written, but printed. The unmitigated, sanctimonious way that they come across, that they do not try to pretend in any way, shape, or form that they are trying to be charitable, and the arrogance that they have everything all figured out really makes this key to this particular episode of Games Denominations Play. They know all the right answers, and they have all the right answers. They know that they do not worship the liturgy because technically they worship Jesus. So therefore, them insisting on adhering to liturgical norms that were common for their denomination back for however long, and back before their denomination even existed in the Catholic Church. That adherence is as critical to your faith as belief in Jesus Christ himself. And if you do not adhere to that, then they will gaslight you and they will make straw mans of your arguments, and they will ultimately drive you out of the church that you attend, because to them, adherence to the liturgy is as crucial as believing in Jesus Christ alone for your Lord and Savior. And it is these kinds of people that make attending church absolutely intolerable for everybody else. Please let me know what you think down in the comments section below, and I will see you in the next one.